Welcome back to the show. We're here today with Andrew Lane. He's the co-founder and CEO of Capwell Services. Capwell has developed a patented and affordable solution that captures and abates methane from end-of-life wells. And these wells specifically cannot be properly plugged. Wait, hold on. Let me say that again. Capwell has developed blah, 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 until they can be properly plugged. That's the key thing.
Right.
Okay. Capwell has developed and patented an affordable solution that captures and abates methane from end-of-life wells until they can be properly plugged. This allows for the immediate large-scale reduction in a client's emissions profile. So, Andrew, you just moved to Houston. Tell us about what's brought you here to Houston today.
I did, yeah. I've been here for about 2 months now. It's really exciting. I've been loving it here. So when we started out in the company, we started out in Appalachia, obviously a high profile of abandoned wells there. It's the home of oil and gas. So we're very fortunate to get our start there, but it's been an amazing experience thus far.
Good. And so we know you're controlling methane. How are you doing that specifically?
Yeah, well, we can back up a little bit too, even, and talk about the problem as a whole. So in the US, there's estimated to be about 3.7 million abandoned orphan wells. And that means there are wells that haven't been maintained, that's abandoned, they don't produce. And then orphaned, which is there's no solvent owner of record, so they actually become a state liability. So that's a problem for you and I. And so about 60% of these are unplugged and leaking methane. So that means, you have a greenhouse gas that has 84 times the warming power of CO2 over 20 years being constantly emitted from these various point sources around the country. And not only that, there's about 14 million people estimated to live within a mile of these. So you have various issues to human health. Methane and VOCs have been linked to increased asthma cases. Some wells can emit H2S, a very deadly gas. So it's a massive problem. And so what we've done to solve it is create an immediate and modular solution. None of these wells are the same. They can go from a rusty piece of pipe in the ground to a fully producing well that had to be abandoned because a logging truck backed into it and now it's leaking from multiple points. So we designed some sealing systems to capture that gas, bring it in, store it, and then either destroy the gas if there's nothing available to do with it around it, which is mostly the case, or do on-site generation or putting back in the pipe if the infrastructure is there.
And so tell me a little bit about the sealing solution. I'm imagining a big gasket, but I'm sure it's more sophisticated than that.
A little bit more. So depending on what's there, you have different sealing solutions. My dream scenario is it's a fully built wellhead that you can literally just tap a pipe into, and that's great. Most of the time, yeah.
And when you say fully built, you're talking about the Christmas tree, or you're talking about
the Christmas tree. And
describe this for what people who've never been to an oil field before. What does this look like? Because I did not appreciate that it was not something with baubles on it when I first heard it.
I know, it's called a Christmas tree, right? It's
yes.
deceiving.
So it's a series of pipe coming out from the well bore that you can use to regulate flow, capture gas, oil, whatever the well is meant to do. So it's basically what the superstructure above ground is in order to get gas out of the ground. And so what we do is sometimes we can tap into that. Most of the times you can't. Most of the times the wells are too deteriorated to do that. In Pennsylvania specifically, sometimes you have literally just rusty pieces of pipe in the ground that used to be the casing of the well. So we have an internal sealing mechanism that can deal with that. But most of the time we're using an external sealing mechanism, which we're in the process of developing to actually enclose the space around the well, capture the gas, and then bring it into our system.
Oh, so you're actually covering, you're literally putting a cap on it to capture the gas.
Cap well,
but
yeah.
Interesting, hence the name.
Yeah.
Got it.
So you said you capture it, and what do you do with the capture methane unless you're putting it back into a pipeline?
Yes. So most of the time what we have to do is destroy the gas. It's an unfortunate reality that a lot of these wells are very old. They've been drilled anywhere from 1859 to, the 1920s in Appalachia is kind of what we've been working on. But that's just an unfortunate reality because there's nothing you can do with it on site. These wells are 2-3 miles deep in the woods. And if you don't do anything, it's just going to leak. So all you can do is have something on site that destroys it. So you can use
flaring.
Yeah, a flare is a pretty ineffective solution, but a fully enclosed incinerator, something that you can run on your own. Thermal oxidizers that you use the waste gas as the assist gas. Those are like the solutions that we're currently using. So.
And what are the regulations currently like for people who drill these wells and then abandon them? And you said, many of them are orphaned. How do you see that? Has the regulation been in the past, and how is that developing?
Yeah, so the regulations for are basically blanket bonds. So when you drill a well, you have to post a bond for the event that, say, you go bankrupt. There should be money there to cover it. But unfortunately, the regulations have mostly been if you post a bond in the state, it covers all your wells in the state. So it actually is just not enough to even cover the plugging liabilities of a single well, let alone your whole well profile. So it's had a bit of lack of teeth, but new federal regulations coming down are really kind of transitioning that into now we have methane fines as outlined by the IRA. But the carrot side of that is that there's $1 billion that's been allocated to as grants to operators to clean up their wells. So there's that incentive now. And then on the public side, as you may know, the bipartisan infrastructure law just gave $4.7 billion to the public sector. So state governments, tribes, the federal government, they have the $4.7 billion was to the states. There's more to the federal and tribes. But that's just to clean up the orphan wells for the states. So big.
Okay, so there's like dedicated funding
yes.
to clean up these wells in the IRA.
Yeah, and that's interesting because there wasn't any attention to the orphan well problem really previous to this. States had their own budgets, but it was just not enough to handle the problem. The problem was too vast, to even think about handling with purely state money. With the federal money, it's a start, but it's not enough to even solve the whole problem.
Yeah, and so I think. You said actually two bills, right? With the IRA and the infrastructure bill have like the two components that really make this the time to start this business. And I think I heard there are also two components on your solution. One is literally capping the well and capturing it, but the other is kind of addressing the deficiencies of existing. Well, it's flare solutions, right? That's really the issue. Is flares aren't that good. Because tell us about some of the weaknesses with flares that make them not work well with these really old abandoned wells.
So a standard oil and gas flare is about 40 feet tall. It requires a very high flow rate in order to operate. So kind of the core premise of our system is that we wanted to create something that could sit on a well immediately and sit there for 5, 10, 15 years until, we can figure out, to plug the well, can we repurpose it? What are we going to do with it? But if you wanted to just throw, a standard flare on them, even the smallest size you could get, you may have some wells with a high enough flow rate to actually keep the flame on, but the well actually doesn't have a very steady emissions profile. So sometimes it's emitting more, sometimes it's emitting less. And there's a lot of research out there that talks about this. And at the end of the day, it's very variable. So even if you have something that can hold a flame for a little bit, it'll flame out and you'll be venting methane through. And that's a problem. You don't want that. So what we do is actually we compress and store the gas in the mean term to actually ensure a most efficient destruction. So we can provide the destruction mechanism, whatever it may be at the end. We don't develop that on our own. We actually currently outsource that to provide that with the ideal amount of gas at the ideal pressure, at the ideal flow rate every time, so we can ensure an efficient destruction.
Yeah, so I guess some of the challenge too is, right, a combustion system has a certain place it likes to run. And if you're not running at that set point, you're going to get leakage of a methane going through because it's incomplete combustion, right? And so because you're able to control that flow rate, you can always, what you're saying is you can always run it where that combustor is most efficient, you get the most destruction. And importantly, we're eliminating that methane, which is, what was it, did you say 84 times worse?
84 times over
84
20
times
years.
worse, right?
Yeah.
And so that's why it's so important to control that combustion system if it means storing it and then turning it on when those flow conditions are right.
Exactly.
Right.
So your customer here, you said, are maybe operators of these wells, but what if there is an operator of these wells?
Yep. So that's when we work with the state governments, and that's actually probably who our first customers are going to be. So the state governments with their orphan wells, they require a solution. They have this money, but out of the $4.7 billion, $1.5 billion of that is actually a performance grant which is basically discretionary, and it'll be awarded to the states that actually increase their own spending on it to limit methane emissions. So what we want to do is we want to help a state immediately abate their emissions profile, and allow a more efficient plugging process, bring the cost down for everybody, at the same time lowering their methane profile and giving them a clear kind of front running in the performance grant section.
Mm-hmm.
So do you also then monitor the emissions?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we actually are part of a partnership of we have partners in specifically Appalachia. Zafiro Methane Corporation does the methane monitoring and initial measurements. We will do the abatement if there's a high enough leak rate to justify it. And then Plants and Goodwin is our local plugging partner. They're the largest plugger in Appalachia. But we are working on onboard sensors to ensure system health and to ensure a zero methane leak process.
I got a silly question. Where's Appalachia?
So yeah, when I mention Appalachia, I'm talking, New York, Pennsylvania, Ohio, West Virginia, and some of Kentucky.
Okay. I keep thinking Tennessee, but I don't think there are oil wells down in Tennessee.
Not too many.
Yeah. So you're saying the wells there are a lot older than, for example, in this area.
Yep. Yeah. Fun fact is the first ever oil well in the U.S. was drilled in Pennsylvania. So
interesting. And they ended up finding more gas. Was that
Yep.
happen? Yeah.
Yep. There's now the new development, and don't quote me on this, but it's mostly unconventional gas plays now.
Mm-hmm. And I think it has also to do with the I guess the nature of the rock, right? Because it's such an old mountain range. It's just, I guess, it accumulates gas better, or at least it's easier to get to the gas than maybe where the oil might be.
Sure.
But it's been doing that for a long time.
But yeah, so the legacy assets in Pennsylvania,
and so no, it's great. So you got a partner who's going to help you do the service and install. You got a partner who can help monitor and verify performance. Does that mean you're just making devices?
Yeah, so that depends. When we actually talk to customers, we try to see which of our three revenue streams works best. So we have a short-term rental, we have a rent-to-own, and we have a sale. The first two are kind of targeted more for orphan wells. So a state government has money, but they don't really have the people necessary to go out there and actually, install the system, move it around, maintain it, whatever you need to do. So that's when we do, the rent-to-own model, which is, if it's a longer-term or short-term rental, if it's a short-term. Because we will provide our local plugging partner, we'll do the labor, we'll do the maintenance, we'll do everything involved so that they don't actually have to hire more people. They have their inspectors and that's all they need. For a private sector company, though, they have that kind of technical ground force that can actually install and maintain these. So they might be more interested in a sale model where we can provide them for a set price. It'll include a couple years of maintenance and training. So the training for their people to be able to install it and put it wherever they want. And the nice part about our system is that you don't have to leave it on one well. You can put it on one well until that well has been, dealt with, plugged, whatever. And then you can move it to the next one. Just with once a year maintenance, you can move it along 5-10 years. Not a problem.
Okay.
Yeah.
So is it not that the gas is like constantly leaking? Because you said you can move it around.
Yes.
I'm just curious, like how
you move it around once the well has either been permanently decommissioned or repurposed.
Actually, so tell us what. So we have this well that was abandoned, or maybe either has an old Christmas tree or it's just there's a hole in the ground. What do they actually got to do to plug it? And why aren't they just doing that today immediately?
Yep. So plugging is a very technical process, and I wish I had my partner Luke here to explain that. But basically what you have to do, and at a very simple level, is stop the vertical flow of gas. So you install cement plugs in each rock formation, and you can't have any gas move beyond the rock structure that it is. Now, the problem with that is, and why you can't do it today, is you need a workover rig to do this. So you actually have to bring like a semi-truck oil rig into the space where it could be very heavily wooded. It could have no access roads. It could be under power lines. So even when a well has been slated to plug, it still could be a multiple month process just to build the roads, and that increases costs. So trying to plug on its own is effective, but it will lead to years of leakage, and it'll lead to a higher cost. So what we want to do is we want to get out there immediately. We can actually, our solution's so transportable, it fits in the back of a pickup truck. It can even be broken down and put in the back of an ATV to run through these woods, get on there and hold it so that the rig can take its time getting up there, save cost, and prioritize plugging by area versus plugging by the priority list that state governments put forward. In addition to this, actually, if we want to look at a higher level, there is a set number of rigs and there's millions of wells. So even if all of these were slated to be plugged, on the list tomorrow, there's still going to be years, if not decades, of lead time leading up to actually getting to these wells. So my plugging partner likes to say, if we're still talking that, this is a generational problem. He says my great grandchildren will still be plugging wells. So we want to be there to ensure that these wells aren't leaking methane while we're waiting for that.
And just put this in dollars and cents, like in an ideal condition, how much does plugging a well cost versus your solution?
Yep. So we can talk, in Pennsylvania with federal money, on average, you're talking about $100,000, a little over maybe. Our solution, it depends on how long you want it out there. Because if we're talking a state job,
just do 1 year.
Yeah. 1 year, maybe. I don't want to nail myself to this, but
give us an order of magnitude. How does that
order
sound?
of magnitude of $10,000 to $20,000.
Yeah.
And,
and we just know, like, if budgets run out and they can do 5 wells versus 1, they're going to pick the 5, even if it's more expensive.
Yep.
Right. Over the lifetime, because of the way the resourcing gets deployed. So it makes sense why that's a solution.
You capture the methane, and then you plug it. Is that how it works? Okay.
Yes.
So that's the second step to it.
Mm-hmm.
And then part of your service is also monitoring the release of gas.
Yes. Yeah. So in the system we have gas quantification. It's more of like an informative tool than a maybe high fidelity carbon credit generating tool. Even though we're working on that, but we also can ensure that from our system there are no leaks, which is what's most important to us. We want to make sure that from leak detection you have a zero methane leakage kind of full solution until you get to the fully plugging process.
And have you seen a difference between how people in the East Coast and the states themselves, how much of a priority it is for them versus Texas, and who's willing to put in more money and effort into actually solving this problem?
Well, I can say that the East Coast, the ones that I've been in particularly, so New York, Ohio, Pennsylvania, are very interested in lowering their emissions profile. And I think so is every state. I haven't been, actually in touch with Texas all that much yet. I am going to a conference for the Texas Orphan Well, conference hosted by the Railroad Commission tomorrow. So hopefully I'll get a better sense of it. But every state wants to lower their emissions profile. Every state wants to do right by its citizens. Texas has a massive plugging budget, and we want to be able to help them utilize that to best lower their emissions profile.
So I think before we started the show, you started telling us about how you got started. So tell us about that journey and the team you built along the way.
Yep. So Capwell was kind of first started as an idea. My co-founders and I were all mechanical engineers at the University of Pennsylvania. And 2 of us were actually engineering entrepreneurship minors as well. So it was always in our minds to start a company. So when it came around to the start of senior year, you had to choose a capstone design project. So something you work on the whole year that hopefully solves a problem. And so we had a group of 5 people beginning. And one of them was actually from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And he had orphan wells, abandoned wells around him. He's like, hey, man, what if we try to do something to solve this problem? I know that there's plugging, but, it's been in my mind because I live there and I'm affected by this. So when we decided to do that, that was actually right when the BIL was going through Congress. So all this national attention was on it. It's like, hey, guys, you're going to get a lot of money if you do this. Sounds good. So we went ahead and started developing that. And we took the year, came up with a quarter scale prototype that we validated with the safe gas. And then it came to the point where, okay, we're going to start our jobs or we're going to do this. So at graduation, I personally gave myself that 3 months before starting my job at a major OFS company, oilfield services company, to say, hey, can we get any traction on this? And so we were reaching out to state governments, Pennsylvania, getting partners. That's when we first started talking to our plugging partner in Appalachia. And so, I saw this massive opportunity in front of me and I said, well, should I take the risk and do this or go to the corporate job? And I just knew that if we waited on this, the time would have passed and I had no other option than to unfortunately quit my job and start Capwell.
And that was a year ago.
That was a year ago. So
and then it took you another year to finally raise the capital. How did that feel?
How did that feel? Scary. So I did, I guess, the whole live in the parents' basement, work out of the parents' garage thing for about a year. Ended up with maybe less than $100 in my bank account by the end of that. But I knew that it was coming. There's a gap here in the market. And we're aiming to solve it in an immediate, cost-effective way. So it was just a matter of time before we did that. So my first step was to raise, I guess, a friends and family kind of round, and that allowed us to build our first prototype that we validated in New York, Pennsylvania, and Louisiana. Once people saw that, then they were jumping on it. Hey, let's start raising now. So that's kind of our funding journey, and that's kind of what I've been seeing in the corporate investing side is like, hey, we need to see something before we put money into you, which is very reasonable, but but also very scary if you're a founder.
And your co-founder, is that someone who came along with you from school, or is it someone you found? Yeah.
Yep. The core team currently is still, the three of us from the project in school.
So you all decided to take this risk.
Yeah. One of us stayed behind at school to do his master's in robotics and brings that very valuable experience to us now. And the other one works part-time for us. But yeah, it's an amazing experience to be able to work with the guys who kind of were there at the inception, right? When we were in college, and, kind of build this company with me along the way. It's been amazing.
Yeah.
And then what triggered that move from, was it in Pennsylvania you guys were based out of?
So in college, we were in Philadelphia, and then I went home to my parents in DC. And what triggered my move from DC to Houston was I just wanted to be where, the customers are. I wanted to be, where the forefront of climate tech is. And so that's, kind of prompted my move from DC to here. So
hold up. Forefront of climate tech is in Houston. You heard that? Take that, Boston.
Yes. That's what we like to hear.
Not to throw shade at Boston, but I'm a Greentown Houston member, I guess.
Yeah.
But yeah, I like to say, when I was in, I've met more people, I think the 2 months here that were very relevant to the business than I did the year in DC. So it's just the fact of being around these people. Everyone's very open to talk about how we can help, how we can work towards net zero together. So it's been, the 2 months here have been incredibly productive and very, very fun even too.
Yeah, I can imagine that there's a lot of relevant talent for you here for the solution that you're building. So agree that you're at the right place.
Thank you. It's good to know that.
Yeah. And one of the things I heard you say is like part of the reason you said you had to do it now is the time. And that poses two questions. Why were you worried that if you waited, it would be too late?
Yeah. So with all this money coming in, you can see a kind of bloom first in the measurement technologies. You're seeing a ton of research and development going into that. And then the kind of next step that people are looking at is then how are we going to, we've measured it. Now what are we going to do with it, right? Plugging is great, but it has that time aspect that we want to eliminate. So the next thing is people are going to start pouring a lot of money into the abatement solutions. And we wanted to, have that first mover advantage in the space. So if we had waited, I'd worried that we'd be kind of boxed out by other people doing things that we'd be trying to do. So.
Yeah. And then kind of the flip side of that question, people have been worrying about flare since the beginning of time, right? What technologically has changed where maybe this couldn't have existed 10 or 15 years ago?
So it's a little less about the advances in technology. There are some really good technologies now that are coming out. So, there's some catalytic development, and there's some even things to do useful with methane at low energy needs. So that's something you could actually theoretically do something useful with the gas on site. But our kind of philosophy was we would love to include that, but we want to make an impact now. So we chose, the most efficient combustor that we can go with and use that as kind of our first step to abate these emissions. And we want to bring these other technologies in as they develop. We didn't want to be waiting a number of years to actually get our stuff out there and try to make a climate impact. We wanted to do it now.
So this is really just driven by market demand.
Exactly.
Now, I was curious. I mean, you started a company right out of college. What has been your biggest learning, and what is it like to be in a startup?
Yeah. Well, I would say, and I can actually answer this with a story too. So I actually turned 23 on a well site in Pennsylvania in the middle of the night. My birthday's November 1st. It was the middle of the night, Halloween, in the pouring rain. And I wanted to get back to the hotel so I could celebrate my birthday. But we actually were putting together our combustor, and we lost a little washer. And we actually had to look on our hands and knees around this well site for a number of hours to find this washer, finish rigging up, and then get in the truck to go home. But the truck was stuck, so we couldn't go home. And I had to call a guy who I'd just met the day before and say, hey, you mind towing me out? So a couple lessons to learn here. Maybe build the small stuff at the factory and not on a well site in the pouring rain at the middle of the night. 2, don't back your truck down a muddy hill that you need to get back up again. And then 3, and this is like the startup journey, is especially at my age, don't be afraid to ask for help. We can't pretend to know everything. We know a lot about, a very specific thing, but I'm not ashamed to ask for help. We've, really been pushing on mentors. We want to have mentors in the finance side. We want to have mentors from the engineering side, the oil and gas side. So asking for help and building that kind of network around you is how we've actually been able to have the success, because we were mentioning a little earlier, it is very relationship driven, and having people who are willing to go to bat for you that have the connections that I may not necessarily have is the reason why we're here.
I think that's such an important lesson that a lot of people just starting out don't understand, is that asking for help, actually people want to help you, right? And it's also knowing where you need help and being able to identify that. So thank you for sharing that. And what has been your biggest challenge?
Yeah, so our biggest challenge, I think, has been it's just the nature of the business as well. When you're working with the government, it's a long sales cycle. Like the engineering development is difficult, but at the end of the day, we know where we are, we know where we need to go. So we have that path forward. It's the kind of the sales side that's a little bit the most daunting, because we want to get in front of people early, right? But then it's kind of the same with funding. They want to be, hey, we want to see your stuff now. It's like, well, actually we have another 3 months of development on this stuff, so you can't see it now. So that's kind of the big pain point, as well as, especially if you're working with the government, hey, you can't see it now. Okay, sorry, we can't allocate any budget to this, post pilot. So wait till next year when we can actually allocate some budget to this. So, but I mean, luckily we're in the point now where we're looking for pilot programs. We have our commercialized system coming out early in 2024. So, we're looking for pilots, trying to get our tech out there, have people see it, and hopefully that gives us the interest to kind of push forward in the government side as well as the private sector.
Yeah, so the sales cycles are long, and like the budgeting. And also, you, the 3 founders have been working more on the technical solution. And now when you're in a startup, it's all about building a business. And what's kind of been your key learnings or transformation in that thinking, that it's not only just about providing a solution, but it's you need to have a product market fit, right?
Yes.
And then you need to develop something that's going to be able to scale.
Yeah, and that and to, I guess, plug Penn's engineering entrepreneurship course, that was instilled in our heads in day one. You want to have a market pull versus a market push. You don't want to just build the tech and kind of throw it at people, say, here you go. So what I see as, I guess, a challenge to us, but it's also a massive opportunity for success is, well, we've built a system to address the problem. That much is clear. We can eliminate methane emissions for people. Now, how can we make it financially worthwhile? And that's what we've been attempting to do, and hopefully we'll demonstrate with our first pilot programs. So.
And you said that you recently finished your pre-seed round. Can you tell us a little bit about that journey, about fundraising?
Yeah. So that I think we started it in about January, February of 22, and ended up closing in August. So it took a little bit of time, but having that even like in the deal process kind of gives you hope, right? You don't want to get your hopes up too much. Anything can happen at any time. But, it was a corporate that, understood the vision, understood the problem, and wanted to help us build towards that. So, I've been very happy to have a corporate investor on early because, again, having people who have the technical expertise as well as the sales and connections in the industry are very valuable to us.
And I noticed did you do the startup competition roadshow? I don't think I saw you do that.
No, I didn't actually.
Was that a choice, or was that just a vestige of where you were?
Yeah, I think it's about where we were. I mean, we applied actually to Greentown. I've always wanted to be a Greentown company, pre-raising any real money. And they said, okay, we'll come back when you've raised some money, and which makes sense, right? It's a cash-based thing. But so then when we got a lot of that, pre having anything, right, pre even prototype, we said, okay, well, we're just going to buckle down and build our prototype, show everybody what we have, and then from there we can go ahead and actually, start getting our name out there. And this is actually the very first step in that. This is the first podcast we've ever done. So thank you for this.
I'm glad to have you. Yeah. But one of the things I'm also curious about, and this is maybe going a few steps back, is, when you're with your team in school, how did you figure out what roles you wanted to have on the team? And did you have to raise your hand and go, oh, I'll be CEO, or was it I'm going to be the CEO? Right? How did that conversation go?
It was more of actually, and I think this was the right way to do it, I hope. We each looked at, our past experiences, what our strengths were. And that's kind of how we decided. So the one who's doing our COO/CFO kind of role right now, had a background in consulting. One of them, the one who's here in Houston with me, is a roboticist. So obviously his technical experience kind of pushed him into the CTO route. And I luckily had a little bit of both. So when it was just when it was me in my parents' garage, I was able to do a little bit of marketing, sales, as well as some of the technical development. So I just kind of fell into the CEO role, I guess, on that. But I think, we're all very happy with where we fit in the corporate structure. And we're all friends as well. It's very nice to be able to come into work every day and work with your friend on something that's cool, meaningful, and can provide a solution to a very big problem.
How do you see the market for your solution developing?
So we have that $4.7 billion from the state side, and we have those grants as well as the fines that kind of force operators to take a stance. But I kind of see it as we want to make this immediate impact, but we want to also create something useful from it. And that may involve bringing in technologies that don't exist yet. And it may involve, a little bit of a change in the system, but that's kind of small compared to our grander vision, which is, we started in oil and gas end of life wells. There's a clear path forward into the marginal producing wells, which is what the IRA is actually addressing. And then finally, we want to actually move into other areas of oil and gas with high methane emissions, and actually develop solutions for those. So we hope, in our grand dream, when I